You've seen the finished monuments, perfect joints, mirror-smooth granite, blocks heavier than trucks, and then you hear the line that never dies. They must have had lost tools. As if ancient Egypt built stone mountains with technology that vanished into thin air. But here's the twist. The lost tools of Egypt aren't usually laser machines or secret devices. They're worse, they're ordinary, they're perishable, they're boring. And because they rot, burn, corrode, or get recycled, they disappear. So today we're going to rebuild the lost toolbox piece by piece. Not fantasy, not aliens, just the real tools that did the work, tools that don't survive well in museums, but survive in the stone itself. The big misunderstanding. What lost really means. When people say lost, they imagine a missing invention, but for archaeologists, lost often means wood that decayed, rope that frayed and got reused, leather that dried and crumbled, copper that was melted down, and recast workshops that got dismantled after the job. Egypt didn't build one pyramid and stop. They ran a state-level construction economy for centuries. In that world, tools are not sacred objects, they're inventory. A copper chisel gets dull, it gets hammered straight, it gets melted, it becomes another chisel. So the missing toolbox isn't mysterious. It's what you'd expect in any society that recycles everything valuable. Now let's step into the worksite, because the best way to understand lost tools is to follow a stone from quarry to placement. Quarry tools. The stone doesn't lie. First scene, the quarry. Before you can move a block, you have to separate it from bedrock. And here's tool number one that confuses modern viewers. The Dolerite Pounder. The brutal hammer. Granite is harder than copper, so Egypt used hard stone to beat hard stone. Imagine a rounded bowling ball-like rock, dolerite, swinging down again and again. Not elegant, but it works, because stone fails by microfractures. 1,000 hits can do what one perfect cut cannot. This is one of the least glamorous lost tools, a hammerstone you barely notice. But the quarry face shows its signature: pocked surfaces, impact scars, controlled bruising. Wooden wedges, the silent splitter. Then comes the tool you almost never find intact: wooden wedges. You drive wedges into cracks, then you soak them. Wood swells. The rock is forced to accept the pressure. It's slow, it's patient, it's devastating. Wood doesn't survive well, but the crack patterns often do. This is how lost happens. The wedge vanishes, the stone remembers. Cutting tools. Copper isn't the blade, it's the holder. Now the famous debate: how could they cut granite with copper? Answer: copper often isn't the cutting edge. Copper saws plus abrasive sand, the real teeth. Picture a long copper saw. If you use it like a modern steel saw, it's useless. But if you feed the cut with abrasive sand, quartz-rich grit, then the sand becomes the teeth. The copper's job is to hold the slurry guide, the groove, keep pressure consistent. The abrasive does the cutting. This is one of the most important lost tools, not a device, but a material process. A modern person sees a copper saw and thinks, that can't cut granite, but the ancient crew wasn't betting on copper. They were betting on sand and time. Tubular drills, the hole that explains everything. Then there are drill marks, cylindrical cores. You don't get that from pounding. You get that from a drill tube plus abrasive. A tube drill doesn't bite like a modern bit. It grinds a circular groove. Again, copper guides, abrasive cuts. And what's lost here? Often the drill rigs were wood frames, rope-driven, constantly rebuilt. Wood disappears. The stone keeps the geometry. Measuring tools, precision without modern machines. If you want tight joints, the real superpower isn't cutting, it's measurement. The cubit rod, the forgotten ruler. Egypt's cubit rods were standardized measures. You can't run a multi-year megaproject without consistent units. A good cubit rod is a control system. It makes sure 500 workers are building the same idea. Plumb, bob, and square, gravity as a tool. Vertical lines don't require lasers, they require gravity. A plumb bob turns the planet into a measuring device, and this is why ancient architecture looks shockingly true. They weren't guessing, they were using physics. The stretching cord, how you make straight lines. A cord pulled taut is a straight line. Simple, right? But now imagine it becomes ceremonial. Not because it's mystical, because it's foundational. If you can't set a straight line and a right angle, you can't scale anything. The cord is a lost tool because it's just rope. It rots, but the site plan proves it existed. Polishing and fitting, the tools that leave no tools behind. Now, we reach the part that feels impossible. Stones fitted so well you can barely slide a blade between them. What tool does that? Usually, abrasion, checking, and repetition. Rubbing stones plus sand, the slow perfection. To flatten a surface, you don't need a perfect plane. You need two surfaces and abrasive. Rub, check, rub, check. And the lost tools here aren't exotic. They're rubbing stones, sandwater straight edges, patience. In other words, the tool is the workflow. Pigment marking, the invisible trick. One practical technique. Mark high spots. You press two stones together with pigment or soot. Where it transfers, you shave. Where it doesn't, you leave. That marking material disappears. The fit remains. That's a lost tool that never gets credit. Cheap pigment, the transport toolbox, the tech that rots away. Now the stone leaves the quarry, and the biggest lost tools are suddenly obvious. Sledges, wooden machines. A heavy timber sledge can move multi-ton blocks, but it requires wood runners, lashings, rope maintenance, wood breaks. Runners wear down. Parts get replaced. Centuries later, you don't find a perfect sledge in a museum. You find the one thing that survives: images, wear marks, road traces, ropes, the real infrastructure. Rope is everything. Pulling, braking, steering, safety. Rope is also valuable. It's reused until it dies, so it vanishes from the record. But rope logic shows up in attachment points, hauling scenes in art, the sheer feasibility of coordinated force, lubrication, water is technology, wet sand reduces friction. A water bearer pouring water is not a detail, it's the system. And what's lost? The jars break. The water evaporates. Only the idea remains unless you know where to look. Lifting tools, the ratchet method. Nobody brags about modern people imagine one dramatic lift. Ancient building is usually the opposite, small lifts repeated safely. Levers, the oldest power multiplier. A long wooden lever and a stone fulcrum can lift corners of blocks, not inches of glory, inches of progress. Cribbing, the wooden staircase under the stone. Lift a corner, slide in a beam, lower, repeat. You build a temporary wooden support tower. This is how you raise massive blocks without cranes. And again, the tool is wood. It dies. The method survives only in logic and traces. The lost tool that built everything. Organization. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The greatest missing tool isn't a device, it's a system. A pyramid is a stone object created by food supply chains, labor scheduling, tool production, rope manufacture, quarry logistics, quality control, supervision, record keeping. If you lose the papyrus archives, you lose the operating manual. And then later generations stare at the result and assume a magical shortcut. But the shortcut was never mechanical. It was administrative. Egypt's secret technology was the ability to coordinate thousands of people for years. That's the tool that doesn't fossilize. The toolbox is still there if you read the stone. So did Egypt have lost tools? Yes, but not in the way people mean. They lost wooden rigs, ropes, wedge systems, abrasive workflows, measuring cords, worksite routines. They lost the boring technologies, the everyday engineering that doesn't survive 4,500 years. And that's why the monuments feel supernatural. Because the real machine isn't visible. It's missing. Not because it was impossible, but because it was made of wood, rope, sand, water, and human discipline.